Support for Extra 106.3 comes from Natural Body Spa and Skin Remedy, celebrating their 35th anniversary and offering gift cards in-store and online. You can discover Mother's Day and anniversary presents online at Natural Body Spa and Skin Remedy at naturalbody.com.
Welcome to the Janelle King Show. I am Janelle King, and this is Extra 106.3, and this is where we discuss kitchen table topics that are typically banned from family gatherings, but they are so necessary in order to have a strong republic. This show airs every Saturday at 3 p.m. Our new time has started today. Woo-woo. So it will be airing every Saturday at 3 p.m. and every Sunday at 9 a.m. You'll get to hear an encore episode of what you missed the day before. And then our podcast, the podcast drops every Tuesday, and you can watch that or on YouTube, or you can listen to it on the podcast park right here on Extra 106.3 or wherever you get your podcasts. Just search the Janelle King Show and it should come right up. There's been a lot going on politically. I've been following, and I feel like there has been this sort of rise of a Black conservatism that is kind of exciting. But for many of us, it isn't anything that we feel is new. It's just a surfacing, because I think now there's this feeling that it's semi-okay to be politically different and to have political differences. And so that's something that we're seeing now. But the question is it sustainable? Is it sustainable? You know, are we seeing a true shifting, or is it due to the political climate? Is this a protest vote, so to speak, or a genuine change in thought? These are things that we're questioning and asking ourselves as Black conservatives who have been around for a while. Is how long will this stick around? Is it a movement, or is it something that we have been praying for a very, very long time, particularly in our own communities, that we will wake up and see the light and see things differently and question things and have perspective? And we're hoping to see that. But either way, regardless of whether or not this particular movement is one that will be as sustainable as we desire or not, what's exciting about it is that it is allowing us to have increased opportunities to adequately share our perspective on so many different things. And I'm noticing that there's more and more conversation around different topics that are a little taboo, or have been taboo in the past, regarding politics and diverse vote and things of that nature, which is why I thought beginning this show with some of the common misconceptions that are typically spoken when referring to Black conservatives would be great. Not to mention that after this segment, in our next segment, we're going to continue listening to some conversations that I've been having with candidates. And this particular candidate happens to be a Black conservative who comes out of Indiana. And we're going to hear more about him in a little bit, but that conversation, or a little bit of that conversation, will be shared. And then lastly, I'm going to kind of recap it, tell you what you can look forward to in the full interview, and kind of continue this conversation a bit. So before we get into his interview, I want to break down a few of the common misconceptions that are associated typically with Black conservatives, and I want to get your perspective on them in order to make sure that we are on the same page. So let's start with the first misconception that we hear the absolute most is tokenism. There's an assumption that Black conservatives are typically tokens to prove the Republican Party isn't racist. But the truth is, there are some who think because they're Black and in the party that they're entitled to funding or support from all Republicans. And that's just a false misconception. It's not right, and we don't agree with them. That's a false perspective that majority of Black Republicans repel and are not associated with. Many of us are a part of the party simply because we have discovered either historical facts or context or things that have changed our thinking around conservatism. And we just happen to be few in number, which is why typically when you look at our pictures, you see that there's like this one sole Black person or minority person that's in there out of a handful of people. And that's what it is. So there's no tokens here. That's a total misconception. Okay, moving on. The next misconception that I hear, and I hear this one the absolute most, is that we are being paid to do what we're doing. There's this assumption that the Republican Party is paying Black Republicans to participate in events and to work on their campaigns and to do those things. Now, while there are paid political positions and opportunities on every campaign, and yes, we are hiring people from all different backgrounds. So there are times where, as a Black conservative, you do have the opportunity to be hired and to work for campaigns, but it's not likely. 99% of the time in most political spaces, whether despite whatever your ethnic background is, if you come in as an intern or you're working on campaigns, 99% of the time there aren't any paid opportunities. It's mostly because you're getting this understanding, you're getting a perspective, and you're enjoying having the opportunity because that's something that makes us stand out. So we often dismiss this idea that there's somehow a paid reason. So there's no paid actors here. Now, lastly, the final misconception that I would like to discuss, and this is a misconception that I think hurts me the most. It's something that I really hate, but I kind of sort of understand how we've gotten this mixed up, but let's just jump into it. It's the idea that Black conservatives hate their Blackness or somehow wish to be white. Well, this is the most frustrating perspective because we kind of catch it from both sides. You have Black people who assume that we hate Black people because we hate the Black cultural requirements. And then you have, on the other hand, sometimes there are white people who think that we are not Black enough in order to win over Black people to conservatism because we don't fit into the stereotype of Black culture. Well, the truth is, we absolutely love our community. We love our community more than you'll ever know. We tend to advocate for solutions for our community more than any of these other groups that claim to be supporting Black people, where they're grifting and taking money from Black people. We have moved past the plight and anger. Instead, we look for moments of gratitude and we look for ways in which we can take advantage of the progress that's already been made in our country. So to answer your question, we love our people, but we hate the cultural requirements, the norms, the expectations, the entitlements, the forced energy that we have to exude in order to prove that we are Black enough. That hasn't benefited our community over time, and it will not benefit our community. Now that we have some understanding, the reason why I brought this up is because I want to introduce you to a young man that I reached out to us through our organization, Let's Win for America Action, LWFAA.com. And he was asking for support in his race. And he's a Black man who was adopted and raised in a predominantly white environment. But that's not why he's Republican or why he's running for office. So when we return after the break, you're going to hear from Phil Clay. He's a candidate for state senate in the state of Indiana. He is running against a Republican incumbent in Senate District 35, which he will explain why he's doing that. But who is he? So he's a native of Indiana in Plainsfield. He's recognized with, or has been recognized with, in the 2022 RNC Rising Star Award. So he obtained that award. He actively participates in the Indiana Leadership Forum. He's an alumni of the 2022 Indiana Republican Diversity Series, emphasizing the importance of conservative values and leadership. He is the co-founder of the Author Clay and Company, where he focuses on bridging education and workforce for minority men. And he is typically in the space of offering them professional development, mentorship, and networking. So he works with minority men. He's the president of the Redevelopment Commission of Plainsfield, and he promotes growth in community development, driven by his passion to enhance his hometown. So that was a snippet of his background. that you're going to hear more about. But then after the break, you'll hear the snippet of our conversation, just a little bit of it. I'm going to come back at the end and give you more about what's happening in that interview. But I found it extremely important to open up this discussion with these common misconceptions, because here you're going to hear from someone who was not raised in a predominantly Black environment. He, when you hear why he's pro-life, you're going to be like, wow. He is just a unique candidate, and he's challenging the status quo and trying to get us back to the traditional values of the Republican Party. You know, one of the things we talked about as well is youth and being young in the party. I think a lot of times we are seen as those who grew up in the party, and a lot of our leaders or the people who have come before us tend to see us as that, you know, as still as the children who were interning and working in the party, when in fact we are pretty much we're grown up. We understand some things. And so I think it's always cool when we get the opportunity to listen to the perspectives of those who have gone that are coming up behind us and able to articulate some of the concerns of the community from a youthful perspective. And so we're going to dive into that and get more understanding. So you stay tuned. I thank you so much for already clicking in and listening and watching. So stay tuned. When we come back, you'll hear a little bit of our conversation, and I'll come back at the end and close us out. You're listening to the Janelle King Show. I am Janelle King, and this is Extra 106.3. Welcome back to the Janelle King Show. If you're listening on the radio, this is Extra 106.3. If you're on YouTube, thank you for joining us. And you get to actually see Mr. Philip Clay where everyone else can hear him. But that being said, it's all good. Before the break, I gave you a whole introduction of who Mr. Clay is. I just kind of broke that down a little bit so you know who you are listening to. If you're on YouTube, you can just hit pause and go to the description, and you can read a quick little blurb about his bio and just kind of understand who he is. Believe me, when we get finished with this interview, you'll know who he is, okay? So don't worry. Philip, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Well, we're so happy to have you. And this is actually interesting. You're breaking up the monotony of me interviewing all Georgia people. So thank you.
I love it. Some great things have happened for me in Georgia. So I'm happy to be down where your people are.
Oh, awesome. Well, we're going to get into that a little bit too. The conversation that you all are listening to was part of my series called the Candid Conversations, which is also Candid Conversations. And that's because I like to just kind of dive in and find out who the person is, as well as hearing about their race, all the other political stuff. This is where we highlight people in conversations for those who are in office and those who are on the trail. So welcome. Again, welcome to the show. We're so happy to have you, Philip. And we're going to jump straight in with just tell us a little bit about yourself, right? I kind of want to know about your upbringing. How was it? What was your political leanings as a child with your parents? And what are some key milestones that have shaped your political beliefs?
Yeah, well, again, I'm Philip Clay, and I'm from Plainfield, Indiana, and I'm incredibly excited to be on the show. I would say that my upbringing was conventional to some and unconventional to others. I grew up in a household where my dad, and I'll always say he's my dad, signed my birth certificate and everything, but he's not my biological father. So he's a huge proponent in my life, someone that I really look up to and admire. So I grew up with my mom and my dad. I have a brother and a sister who are 8 and 13 years younger than I am. So there's a bit of an age gap between us. So it took Big Brother to a whole different meaning for us. But I grew up in Plainfield, which is a predominantly white community. It's a suburb of Indianapolis, just on the west side. And it's really the greatest thing I've ever known. The community itself has just been so welcoming to us, and I've lived here my entire life. I think there was 3 years there's a gap where we were in surrounding areas that still touch Plainfield, but not Plainfield exactly. And growing up, I would say it was a conservative household, but I think what's really cool about my parents is they gave me the ability to really understand that there are other choices out there. And even though they were conservatives and they really pushed conservative values, anytime I had a question, they would always be willing to answer those questions or kind of help me come to the conclusion of those myself, just give me the opportunity to explore.
That was great. I appreciate you sharing a little bit about your background, a little insight into how you were brought up and but let's go a little bit deeper. What was the impact on you being brought up in a predominantly white area? Was your family conservative? And if so, what was the messaging to you as a Black guy?
Yeah, and it's one of those things growing up in a white community, and really not. I never really saw myself as Black. I think the first time I remember being like consciously aware of my skin color was in second grade. Ironically enough, I just saw that teacher over the weekend, so it was good to reminisce with her. But she was talking about Martin Luther King and just the impacts that racism had on schools and just life in general, society. And I remember her saying, little boys and girls like Philip and Donnie and Kayla wouldn't be able to be in class with us today if it weren't for some of the sacrifices that were made. And it's kind of one of those moments where you look around and you're like, am I really different than everybody? And then you start to kind of notice. And my parents were phenomenal, and again, letting me ask questions and helping me kind of come to conclusions on my own. I think it's different growing up in a predominantly white community and trying to find really what your race is. So I could see culture's impact, I could see the historical impact, and then I could kind of see where I fit in through everything else. So again, it wasn't a conventional upbringing, but I think it really helped me shape opinions to where I am now. And I think sometimes we get into if it's the only thing that we've ever known, it's hard to understand differing opinions. And for me, it was something almost that I found. And so I feel like I've got some unique perspectives in that. My family being conservative, again, they really never pushed anything particular. I mean, it was conservative household. We Christians, we go to church, we went to youth group and Sunday school and all of that. But the values really weren't any different. And then as I started to gain more Black friends, as Plainfield got more diverse, I realized that a lot of the things that my parents had taught me were the same things that theirs had taught them. So there really wasn't any lag or any difference. I would say it was pretty conventional.
What's fascinating about that is I grew up in an apolitical home as well, and I grew up in a predominantly Black area, and so, but just having that little bit of freedom to decide for yourself, having parents who believed in instilling values versus perspectives and ideology, I think is so impactful, and I wish more parents would do that, rather than trying to guide people into one direction or the other. Let's just instill those values, because you're absolutely right. That's what drew me to the Republican Party, is I looked at how I was raised, the principles that they instilled in me, and it aligned more with the Republican Party. So that's how it was. It was just that simple for me. So I really do understand that. Tell us a little bit about your professional background.
Yeah, so I'm 29, so I like to say I've done a bit of everything in my time. So I started working at 15. And I was actually in shoe sales, the perfect job for a 15-year-old, a sophomore in high school. I worked at Finish Line, and it was kind of cool because a couple of my buddies worked there. And what was really unique about that is I went into the job expecting to hang out with friends, but what I really found was a real passion for sales. And I think what's more is helping people. It's one thing to put somebody in a shoe. It's another thing to be like, no, I can get you the shoe that's going to help you with that knee pain that you're having. Or, if you're having issues on the court, here's a shoe that's going to help you with, maybe not sliding around. It's going to give you a bit more traction, and just working through that kind of stuff. And from sales, I would say I've always had somewhat of a sales role, be it professional sales like car sales, or be it, floor sales at like a hardware store, and somehow combined all that and found my way into banking. And banking is just really kind of, I like to say it's where I've grown up. It's where I met my wife. I had my first kid in banking. It's just, it's where I've grown up. And I think it's a really cool opportunity to combine sales with really genuinely helping people.
That's wonderful. Okay, so now let's get a little bit deeper into politics. Some of the current affairs that are going on right now. I mean, we have the border, we have abortion, we have economy. I mean, it's just so much happening right now. Of all the things that are in the forefront of our minds politically, what would you say is the most important from your vantage point?
And maybe this is just a banker's perspective, but I think the economy is definitely something that we have to acknowledge. I mean, it's something that we really have to work to get back to, even those pre and during the Trump administration, not just policies, but the economy itself. I just saw that inflation had risen again this morning or over the last month. It's one of those things where you sit back and you do an inventory, especially during a presidential election, and Biden's campaigning on Build Back Better. And it's like, I don't know if anything's really been built. I don't know if anything's really back. And I know things certainly aren't better. So I would say the economy is something that we absolutely have to look at. And, really early on, I was able to give some opinions on the economy and the jobs reports and some of those things. And at a certain point, I don't think the Bureau of Labor Statistics starts to account for the people that are working 2 and 3 jobs to, have the same amount of money that they used to have the same amount of money that they would have had with just one job. To buy the same things they would have with just one job. So I think the economy is an incredibly important thing. But I think everything that you listed, I mean, the border is out of control. I mean, we've got millions of migrants that are flooding in, and we really don't know who some of these people are. And that's incredibly scary. Every state is now a border state. And, I've had friends, I haven't had a chance to go to Eagle Pass myself yet, but I've had friends and, our county sheriff here in Hendricks County that have gone to the border, and it's really a humanitarian crisis. I mean, these coyotes are leaving people at the border, and they're trying to get under the barbed wire at Eagle Pass, and there's people that are quite literally drowning in the river that can't get through, and the government can't touch them, or the border patrol agents can't touch them, because then they become a liability of the U.S. government. And abortion is something that I think we've started to get a handle on it here in Indiana, but I think some of these other states, the more liberal states, are starting to really ramp up, and that's incredibly concerning. So I think there's a myriad of things that we can look at this political season. Just, I think we have to start with one and see what we can work through the rest of the list with.
Indiana is a primarily Republican state, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so what would you say, what is your message around the abortion topic? Because I know that's something that the left is going to probably pretty much harp on going into 2024. But what is your stance on abortion, and how is it impacting your state?
Yeah, well, Indiana's a super majority. So we have both the House and the Senate, and we've got the 2 senators, the gubernatorial seat. It's massive, our lead here in Indiana. Abortion is something that impacts everybody. And like I said, I think what we're seeing now is we've drastically reduced the number of abortions that are happening in Indiana, but now some of those people are fleeing to Ohio and Chicago and Michigan and some of these other states, which is really just disheartening. And I think one of the things that we have to look at in Indiana, and one of the things I'm most excited about with our campaign, is we have to look at adoption reform. We have to look at, zero cost and no cost adoption options. And I think that's incredibly important. We've saved these babies, or we are saving these babies. Now we need to make sure that they're going to the right homes. And I think that includes a look at, DCS and the foster care system, to make sure that a lot of these systems are really doing what they're saying they're doing, and the funds that are supposed to be going to them are being used for the right purposes. So that's incredibly important to us here in Indiana.
I have this weird thing. I get chills when I hear of solutions in politics, because it's so rare. It's so rare. But when you mention the adoption reform, I got chills, because I'm like, oh my God, yes. I mean, we've got to have policies that's going to stretch across the broad spectrum of this conversation. It can't only be protecting, life and in the womb, So I love that. I think you definitely should push that heavily, particularly in your area. Now, let's touch on, before we jump into your particular race, let's look at this. Can you create a landscape of Indiana for those that are watching from other states? What is the political landscape? Because you're running against an incumbent who is a Republican. So you are in a Republican primary. I mean, are you dealing with the factions? Like, is it like here we have like the traditional Republicans, establishment, MAGA, like the whole bit, right?
Yeah.
Where do you fall, and how is that impacting your race, and what's the landscape for Indiana?
Yeah, so I'm a conservative Republican. I tend to think of myself more of like a Reagan Republican. I think a lot of Republicans romanticize that time, but they really don't put anything in action to getting back to those times. I think that President Trump was probably the closest that we've been, especially in my lifetime, short lifetime. Again, I'm only 29, but I think that's the closest that we've been. And I think that's something that we really need to get back to. And, I'm very much a diplomacy over daggers type of person. And you see a lot of infighting that happens with the Republican Party, and it's concerning, and especially in Indiana, right? In a supermajority, you have people that are, constitutionalists, and then you have people that are, farther right than the constitutionalists, and then you have people that are more moderate Republicans. And I think politics has been so polarized right now that we're afraid to get anything done. And in Indiana, and I keep using the analogy, I played football growing up. With a supermajority, we should be putting the ball in the end zone constantly. We should be scoring so much that it just gets boring at some point. We have to shake things up. But I think that's what we really need to get back to. And I think we need to get back to having those conversations. And instead of reaching across ourselves to reach across the aisle, I think we have to work within our own party to get things done, because we have the votes, we have the ability to do so. It's just what we need to get back to. And I am running against an incumbent. He's a 35-year incumbent. And so it's a bit different situation. I know one of the, I'm sure in campaigning, one of the primary rules is thou shalt not, primary an incumbent. But, in our situation, our incumbent's left the Republican caucus. He's not showing up to committee meetings. He's lost his committee chairmanships, and he's really just ineffective. And, this isn't the job that I want, but it's the job I need to do. And I, ask a bunch of people to look around and step up, and really no one wanted to step up. And so thankfully, my wife and son are on board, and we decided that we were going to step in and we were going to impact and make change.
That's interesting. 35 years. You're part of this new generation of politics. I feel like I'm a part of that as well, being part of the younger class of politics. And we hit different, Yeah. I think we've understood, and we're continuing to understand that in this world, people are not going to pass the baton. You probably have to take it out of their hand, because it's not about the person who's holding it. It's about where you taking the baton, right? And that is something that our generation is fully equipped to debate, understand, because at the end of it all, majority of the people who are in office that are older is not going to have to deal with or feel the effects of the decisions that are being made as much as we will and our children will. So there is a righteous indignation that comes upon us as younger conservatives to step up and make sure that we're doing what's right as it relates to our future. So this whole idea of not primarying incumbents, that's out of the water. We got to let that go. If you're not doing it right, if you're going to affect my children, you're out. Secondly, this whole idea of not sharing what our opponent is doing, in other words, don't speak bad is what they say, out of the water. If you're doing something, now I'm not talking about salacious stuff, but if you're doing something in office that is wrong, we're going to talk about it, because this is how we ensure that we have the right people in those seats. That being said, I saw there was a lot of articles around Black on Black crime. When it comes to you, where do you stand on the crime and those type of issues?
Yeah, well, and I think really, to talk specifically about Indianapolis, we've seen crime just spiral out of control. And it's really under Democrat policies. Joe Hockstett's been the mayor in Indianapolis for, I think this is his third term now. And it's not gotten any better. He won the majority vote. He had more straight ticket votes than our primary or our general election challenger on the Republican ticket had votes in general. And so it's very blue. And I think one of the things that we have to do, and especially something that we're looking at in the General Assembly, is getting these ineffective prosecutors out of office. If they're not going to do the job, then we need to get somebody in that will. And I think we can, at a certain point, and you kind of referenced it just a moment ago, but we can stand around and we can talk about things, or we can get in action. And, I hate to reference, just stuff that we talk about at home, but we're about action. That's what we're here for. I'm not content to be on the sidelines. I'm not content to watch from the stands. We have to get involved. We have to get in the game, and we have to, suit up and make some of these plays.
Now, your opponent sits on, or he was on a committee, I think it was the Correction and Crime and Law Committee. But outside of that, what has, I'm going to say his name, Michael, what has he done that you feel poses a challenge to your race, or has he not done anything? Where do you stand as it relates to your opponent?
Yeah, and I absolutely respect Mike. And he and I had a really good conversation. And honestly, that conversation is part of the reason why I'm running. It's one of those things where I don't believe in not having honest conversations with people. That's just who I am. If there's something that needs to be said, we're going to talk it out and we're going to work through it for better or for worse. And I told Mike that I was running, and I said, at the end of the day, I want to run a race that's respectful to you. And I hope you could do the same for me. And, he doesn't drink coffee. I know that about him, but I said, at the end of the day, I hope we can sit down and drink a Coke or play around a golf and talk through things. My issue with Mike isn't that Mike hasn't been a great legislator. He has been. It's that he's cited personal differences with Republican leadership, and because of that, he's sitting on the sidelines. And when that begins to affect our district, there's not a ton about Indiana that people really know. But when you start talking about Indiana, people talk about the Motor Speedway, they talk about our airport, and they talk about our law enforcement. The Law Enforcement Academy, the Indianapolis International Airport, and the Indianapolis Motor Speedway are all in the district that I'm running for. So we have three of the biggest things that people talk about in the district, and we have a senator who's not representing us the way he should be. And to me, that's why I'm running. That's the action that we're about, and that's what we're here to change.
Can you give us the breakdown of your district? What number? What if there's counties involved? What do I need to know if I'm not in Indiana? And then, most importantly, for those who are in Indiana, like, who are your constituent base? What areas should pay attention to your race?
Absolutely. So it's Senate District 35, State Senate District 35, and that includes Speedway, Plainfield, Indianapolis, Decatur Township, Canby, Clayton, and Hazelwood. So that would be Marion County and Hendricks County. It's very split. It's about 137,000 people in total. And our district is incredibly important because a lot of the donut counties, which is what we'd call the counties that surround Indianapolis on 465, a lot of the donut counties are Republican, but they could very easily go purple. They could very easily go blue, especially with the influence that Indianapolis has right now. This race is incredibly important because typically the winner of the primary is the winner of the general. And we have a choice right now. And with so few people turning out for primaries, we have a real opportunity right now to really set our policy for the next legislative session and understand what we're going to do for the community. And I would just encourage people to get involved. One way or the other, get involved, because I think it's incredibly important.
What are your key platform items that you're running on that separates you from your opponents, but also shows forward thinking?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of the same things. We have a lot of similar ideas, right? And it's a Republican primary, so they're all going to sound very similar. Obviously, being anti-abortion, pro-law enforcement, pro-tax reform, pro-adoption reform, pro-border security, because I think we absolutely need to secure the borders. I think the biggest difference between my opponent and I is I'm for term limits. I think that we should have, I don't want to give a specific number, but I have a number in mind, and it's way less than 15 years that someone should be in office, because I believe the founding fathers never intended for us to be in office for that long. And, to me, it's one of those things where if you sit in office for 35 years, at a certain point, that's time enough for multiple generations to have grown up under your leadership. And if there's really not been a noticeable change, then it's time for new leadership. And I think that's the biggest differentiator between us.
Okay. And are there any bills or policies that you would like to jump on day one? I'm going in with this topic in mind or this issue in mind.
Yeah. For me, the biggest thing is school choice. I think that's incredibly important. The ability for parents to decide the educational system that works best for their children. My mom's a charter school teacher, and so school choice is something that's very near and dear to our family and something that we understand a great deal. And I also think that we have to look at property taxes. The average property tax bill in Indiana right now is just over $1,300, and I think that's incredibly high. We shouldn't have to rent our homes from the government. We should be able to own our homes outright. And then, at the end of the day, I think we have to look at workforce development. And Indiana is, I think, 7th in attracting college students to the state. We're 47th in retaining them. So what does that tell you? It tells you that Indiana is training a bunch of kids to go and work in other states. And Indiana has an incredible story to tell. We just have to do a better job of telling it, and we have to do a better job of keeping our students here. And I think that's a really big push for us.
You're listening to The Janelle King Show. I am Janelle King, and this is Extra 106.3. Welcome back to the Janelle King Show. I am Janelle King, and this is Extra 106.3. And before the break, we discussed a few of the misconceptions involving Black conservatism. We talked about the tokenism comment. We talked about you not being Black enough, or you not loving your Blackness. We talked about the concept of us being paid and all this other stuff. So if you missed the first half, don't worry. You'll definitely get to either listen to the encore episode tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. or you can go to YouTube and wherever you get your podcast and listen to the entire conversation with Phil Clay, or you can also listen to this entire show there, followed by the snippet of his background. I played a little bit of his interview, and like I said, Phil Clay is the Indiana State Senate Republican. He is a candidate. He's running against another Republican, which I find to be interesting, and we did talk about that. And like I said before, if you want to listen to the full interview, if you were intrigued by what he said in that little snippet and you're like, I gotta hear more, then you can go to my YouTube page, and you can find it by simply opening the YouTube app and searching the Janelle King Show, and you will listen there. Now, it's free to listen, but the only thing I do ask for is that you like, comment, share, or subscribe. Preferably that you subscribe so that you can support the channel, and it's free to you. We thank you so much. So during the interviews, there's some things that stood out to me that I want to just kind of mention that, I would like you to go back and check it out and see what you think. But during the interview, Phil emphasized he put a significant emphasis on the importance of the economy and why we need to focus in on that, particularly in comparison to some past administrators and leaders. He also voiced concerns about inflation, of course. Let me tell you something. Inflation. There are so many times when I look around and I see things like in the city here in Georgia, like in Atlanta, I will see like prices for gas. It's $4 and some change. And then I'll drive right up to the suburbs or out to the outskirts in the rural areas, and you have gas prices sitting at like $3.30 something cents. Now, mind you, all of this is extremely expensive and a little unnecessary, but I don't think $3.34 is anything. It's much better. But I often ask myself, how are people surviving right now? How are you surviving? Like it's so hard, and I often think about that. So he did touch on inflation in particular, and he highlighted the need for tangible progress beyond these campaign promises that we keep hearing from people. It's something unique that's happening right now. For the people who are coming to the Republican Party that are leaving the Democrat Party, no matter what their ethnic background is, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that they're just tired of all these promises and not seeing results, and they want something different. I know that's particularly the case when it comes to Black students. They're tired of these 50-year promises never panning out. Well, I think young people or young politicals are starting to get a little irritated with the promises as well, along with these explanations, these deep explanations as to why we can't get things done, where for us, it looks like you just don't have courage. You're afraid to stand up for the truth. You're scared to say something. You're playing the game and all this other stuff. So, I do think that there's a reckoning that's taking place within the political world as well as the civilian world, as I call it, because I really do believe that people are waking up to the fact that it's almost like we've allowed you to try to do it. You didn't do it. Now we're coming in. So anyway, back to the interview. Clay also discussed the challenges at the border. He talked about how it's a humanitarian crisis, and that this influx of migrants is a major issue. Pause. Let's talk about the Chinese that are coming in across the border. I have a couple of questions. One, what are you fleeing? What are you seeking asylum from? That's number one. I would love to see what their answer is. And two, now do we see why this is a problem? In the interview, Phil also touched on adoption, abortion, but he also talked on adoption reform. And that's something that was really, really interesting to me. He provided some solutions that I thought were really cool. I rarely get chills, but when I do, I get chills when I hear of a good political solution. We went on to discuss internal politics and just the political landscape of Indiana as a whole, where he emphasized the importance of, the intra-party collaboration and just effective governance, right? And being able to govern together. He said something I thought was really cool. He said that he's more about diplomacy and not daggers. I think I'm saying that correctly. He may have said it a little differently, but I really like when he said that while he was addressing his decision to run against an incumbent. He shared his campaign highlights, the importance of the community involvement. He talked about shaping legislative outcomes. I mean, it was a really good interview, He identifies himself as a conservative Republican with a focus on action and diplomacy, as I stated before. And he found it extremely important to represent his district's interests, which is something that I don't hear a lot about. I hear more so about the interests of the party or the interests of those overhead and all that good stuff. But I don't really hear a lot about focusing on the interests of the community. And, it's interesting. Back in the day when I was interning and then I started helping people with their campaigns, and it was a lot of local races, small races. And I would just advise on things that I've noticed from working on several campaigns in the past. And the number one thing I always will advise is that you focus in on looking at the actual core needs of your community. There was one particular race where they were having issues with their electric bill. There was something going on where there was a policy in place, or there was something that was impacting the rates and how their electric bill was being impacted. And so that being said, I advise the candidate to create a specific point around just that talking point. I believe that is what tipped the candidate over the scale and ended up with a win, because people were coming to the polls and I would hear them saying things. Like I would overhear conversations like, well, this candidate I think is going to support such and such with the electric or something. And I can't remember, it was long ago, but I would overhear it. I would never interject, of course. I would never say anything because I was not supposed to do that, and I didn't. But I thought that was interesting. I thought that was pretty fascinating. So really focusing in on the needs of his district is something that he is watching closely. And we close by discussing his position on social issues. I had to ask, because him being a Black conservative, and he shared his perspective on some of these social topics like reparations and crime and all of those things. And I thought it was pretty fascinating to hear it from his perspective, considering how he was raised, where he was raised, and all of that. So that's where we were. That's where we were. And I thought it was a quite, we hit a variety of issues. We hit a variety of topics. And I'm looking forward to it. The next interview that's going to be dropping soon is with our public service commissioner. And then I have an interview with a public service commissioner. And then I have another interview that's with a candidate who's running for Congress. So, we have an open congressional seat that's getting ready to really become very competitive. And so I do have an interview coming up with that person. And so it's going to be fun. It's going to be fun. We have a lot going on, a lot paying attention to. So I thank you so much for just taking the time to listen to the show. I thank you for being a part of this. And I thank you for supporting these candidates by listening to their content and hearing what they have to say. Local. We've got to get back to focusing in our local races. So thank you again for listening. I am Janelle King. This is the Janelle King Show on Extra 106.3. Enjoy your week.
This morning in North Carolina, wheels are spinning. Determination is winning. A passion is now a thriving business, and it shows no signs of slowing down. How? The power of a conversation, like the one Clint Spiegel had with First Horizon Bank about starting a bike wheel manufacturing facility in Asheville. Now it's not just talk, it's rubber meets road. First Horizon Bank. Let's find a way. Go to firsthorizon.com/Clint. First Horizon Bank, member FDIC.
Support for Extra 1063 comes from Natural Body Spa and Skin Remedy, celebrating their 35th anniversary and offering gift cards in-store and online. You can discover Mother's Day and anniversary presents online at Natural Body Spa and Skin Remedy at naturalbody.com.
The fan is ready for Brave season. Are you?
3-1 smoked high in the air, deep center field, and heading for the horizon. A home run by Olsen.
We're streaming every game of the Braves 2024 season free on the 680 The Fan app.
So make sure you download it now and don't miss a pitch of the Braves this season.